Prime Minister said repeatedly that he had no knowledge of funds from the dictatorship in Beijing going to federal election candidates. Today we learned that is not true.
Was it ever briefed up out of CSIS? It was not.
Mr. Speaker, I've just been informed by the National Security Advisor that the CSIS Intelligence Assessment of July 20th, 2021 was sent by CSIS to the relevant departments and to the National Security Advisor in the PCO. This contradicts what the Prime Minister said yesterday.
Calls are growing for a nonpartisan public inquiry into China's attempts to interfere with our elections. You used to call yourself transparent by default. Why are you so resistant?
We want open and independent. An open, independent public inquiry to get to the truth and make sure it never happens again.
David Johnston has served this country in many, many different ways through a long and unimpeachable career.
There should not and need not be a separate formal public inquiry.
So we have you with an association to the Trudeau Foundation. We have Mr. Iacobucci, who is associated with the Trudeau Foundation. We have Ms. Block, who is a lifetime donor and supporter of the Liberal Party, including attending fundraising events with the Prime Minister in recent time. Given all of that, you don't see a conflict of interest?
I am gobsmacked beyond belief to listen to you in the role as President and CEO and a former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs to suggest you knew nothing.
Special Rapporteur David Johnston has submitted his resignation to the Prime Minister.
Although we now know that Chinese foreign interference has been taking place for years, it only started making headlines in the mainstream media on February 17, 2023, when the Globe and Mail dropped a bombshell report that included top-secret CSIS documents leaked by at least 2 patriotic whistleblowers. The article included extremely detailed methods of how the Chinese were attempting to interfere in and influence Canadian elections and political leaders. This is a timeline following when information was first known to the Canadian Parliament and the subsequent events that followed.
The Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, says in its 2021 annual report that the foreign interference threats accelerated in 2021. The spy agency said efforts by foreign states to steal intellectual property from Canadian researchers and companies were, quote, persistent and sophisticated, end quote, and contributed to a mounting toll on the country's vital assets and knowledge-based economy. It was warned that foreign interference threats in Canada to shape public policy or harass dissidents, as well as espionage, increased in scale, scope, and complexity in 2021.
Canada's Innovation Minister says he believes there's a Western consensus forming to decouple from or reduce trade with China and other authoritarian countries. François-Philippe Champagne, speaking before a business audience in Washington at a fireside chat event sponsored by groups including the Canadian Embassy, the Canadian American Business Council, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, is the second federal cabinet minister to talk publicly about decreasing trade with countries such as China and Russia. Deputy Minister Chrystia Freeland, speaking in Washington on October 11th, also talked of the need to embrace policies that shift trade to friendly partners and like-minded democracies, a friend-shoring approach that would reduce commercial relations with adversarial countries.
A recently unsealed indictment in the United States alleges that Beijing's overseas campaign to put pressure on Chinese nationals to return and face criminal charges in China includes enforcement efforts on Canadian soil. These U.S. accusations have come to light about 6 weeks after Spain-based human rights group Safeguard Defenders alleged that 3 of China's more than 50 overseas police stations are operating in Toronto. China's embassy in Canada has denied this.
A senior official at CSIS tells members of parliament that China is the foremost aggressor when it comes to foreign interference in Western countries and works within their political systems to corrupt them. Adam Fisher, CSIS Director General of Intelligence Assessments, says to a House of Commons committee investigation into foreign interference in elections that Russia and China tend to be the two big players, though they differ in their methods. Moscow, Mr. Fisher said, tends to employ methods that erode confidence in Western political systems. Russia is more inclined toward disrupting and undermining our system of government through messaging that casts what is happening in some doubt. Beijing, on the other hand, prefers to work its way into Western political systems, he said.
A report from Global News indicates that CSIS warned the Prime Minister that China has been targeting Canada with a foreign interference campaign, including Beijing allegedly providing cash for 11 federal candidates in the 2019 election. Mr. Trudeau later said this was incorrect and he has never been briefed on this. National Security Advisor Jody Thomas also said there was no evidence of money going to candidates. She told a parliamentary committee in December, quote, that we have not seen any money going to 11 candidates, period.
At the G20 summit in Indonesia, Mr. Trudeau approaches President Xi Jinping about serious concerns of China's alleged interference in Canada. Mr. Xi later berated the Prime Minister for releasing what he considered to be a private conversation.
Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly unveils a long-awaited Indo-Pacific strategy that promises to bolster the ability of national security agencies to combat foreign influence in the region and in Canadian affairs. Ottawa will provide nearly $230 million over the next 5 years to expand the capacity of Canadian intelligence and cybersecurity agencies to work closely with partners in the Indo-Pacific region and also to protect, quote, Canadians from attempts by foreign states to influence them covertly or coercively, end quote, according to the National Security chapter provided by the Globe and Mail.
Commissioner Brenda Lukey says the RCMP is investigating broad foreign interference by China in Canadian affairs, but declines to detail precisely what type of activities are being probed by the federal police force.
The Globe reports that the Prime Minister said he's never received any intelligence that China allegedly funded federal candidates in the 2019 election, but sidestepped repeated questions about whether he was ever informed of efforts by Beijing to interfere in Canadian elections or domestic politics.
He still won't answer the question. The question was specifically about whether intelligence, law enforcement, or public servants briefed him or in any way informed him of any interference in any of our elections.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, back in 2019, we established a professional, a nonpartisan, independent group of top civil servants and intelligence officials to ensure that the integrity of our elections would not be compromised. They watched and reported in the 2019 election, they watched and reported for the 2021 election, and in both cases confirmed that the integrity of our elections was not compromised.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The question was not whether the election was compromised. The question was whether officials in intelligence, law enforcement, or the public service at any time informed the Prime Minister of allegations of any interference in our elections. Yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite brought in the element of allegations of interference. I can confirm, based on the news reports that a number of people have been remarking on for the past number of weeks, that I have never gotten any information from any of our security agencies or police officers or intelligence officials or public servants on any information on anyone receiving, as a federal candidate, receiving money from China, as the allegations highlighted.
Bull Leader of the Opposition.
The question wasn't whether or not he heard allegations of money going to a candidate from China.
The Globe reports that the Prime Minister received a national security briefing during the fall in which he was told China's consulate in Toronto had targeted 11 candidates, 9 Liberals and 2 Conservatives, in the 2019 federal election. CSIS Director David Vigneault told Mr. Trudeau that there was no indication that China's interference efforts had helped elect any of the candidates, despite the consulate's attempts to promote the campaigns on social media and in Chinese language media outlets.
The Globe reports that Canadian universities have for years conducted joint research with Chinese military scientists on hundreds of advanced technology research projects. Researchers at 50 Canadian universities have collaborated with and published joint scientific papers with scientists connected to China's military, generating knowledge that can help drive China's defense sector in cutting-edge, high-tech industries.
Ottawa announces it will no longer fund research with Chinese military and state security institutions and is urging the provinces and universities to adopt similar national security measures.
The Globe reports, based on CSIS documents, that China employed a sophisticated strategy to disrupt Canada's democracy in the 2021 election campaign. The CSIS documents reveal that the campaign's primary goals were to ensure that a minority Liberal government was returned in 2021 and to defeat conservative politicians considered to be unfriendly to Beijing.
Secret and top secret CSIS documents viewed by the Globe and Mail reveal how China sought to protect its network of Canadian friends, a community it relies on to build relations, influence, and covertly gather information from members of parliament and senators. Chinese diplomats quietly issued warnings to friendly, influential Canadians in early 2022, advising them to reduce their contact with federal politicians to avoid being caught up in foreign interference investigations by Canada's spy agency, CSIS.
Highly classified CSIS documents seen by the Globe paint a picture of a broad Chinese strategy to interfere in Canada's democracy and gain influence over politicians, corporate executives, academics, and vulnerable Chinese Canadians. The documents reveal that Beijing's ruling Chinese Communist Party, CCP, uses 3 color-coded political interference tactics to gain influence over Canadians here and those traveling to China. Blue refers to sophisticated cyber attacks on targets' computers, smartphones, and hotel rooms for possible blackmail. Gold refers to bribes. Yellow refers to what CSIS described as honeypots, how the CCP employs sexual seduction to compromise targets. A House of Commons committee probing Chinese interference in the 2019 federal election is recalled during Parliament's scheduled 2-week break to extend its mandate to include the 2021 campaign.
A Globe report reveals that the Canadian military found and retrieved Chinese monitoring buoys in the Arctic this past fall. The buoys were spotted by the Canadian Armed Forces as part of Operation Limpid, a continuing effort to provide early detection of threats to Canada's security.
Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland raises national security concerns about Wealth One Bank of Canada, telling 3 of its founding shareholders that they could be susceptible to Chinese government coercion, according to a Globe investigation.
Two former advisors to Mr. Trudeau, as well as NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, called for a nonpartisan public inquiry into Chinese state-directed interference into the 2019 and 2021 federal elections. The Prime Minister ruled out a public inquiry a day earlier, saying he was satisfied with hearings being conducted by a parliamentary committee.
The Globe reports that Chinese billionaire Zhang Bin pledged $200,000 in 2016 to the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation after CSIS captured a conversation between him and an unnamed diplomat at one of China's consulates in Canada.
The Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation said it returned the money from Mr. Zhang after a Globe report that the pledge was part of Chinese-directed influence operation targeting the current Prime Minister. President and CEO Pascal Fournier said in a statement on its website that the foundation is returning $140,000 of a $200,000 pledge. The foundation received 2 payments of $70,000 each, but never received the rest of the money, she said.
David Vignon, the director of CSIS, says an investigation is underway to find the whistleblowers who leaked highly classified information on Chinese election interference to the Globe and Mail and Global News. A report based on the work of a panel of senior public servants determines that efforts to meddle in the 2021 federal election did not affect the outcome of the vote. Quote, "National security agencies saw attempts at foreign interference, but not enough to have met the threshold of impacting electoral integrity," end quote, said Maurice Rosenberg, a former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and the former CEO of the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, who wrote the report for the federal government.
Opposition parties team up to pass a parliamentary committee motion calling for an independent probe into foreign interference. Liberal MPs on the Procedure and House Affairs Committee opposed the motion, but were outvoted by the Conservatives, New Democrats, and the Bloc Québécois. The motion is non-binding.
Trudeau initiates 2 closed-door probes into the Chinese election interference that will be reviewed by a special rapporteur. The National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians will study China's interference in the 2019 and 2021 elections. The National Security and Intelligence Review Agency will examine how investigations into Chinese election meddling have been handled.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre accuses Mr. Trudeau of playing into China's hands by refusing to hold a public inquiry on foreign interference. Quote, "We want an open and independent public inquiry to get to the truth and make sure it never happens again," end quote, he said during a news conference. Liberal MPs mount a filibuster to stop the opposition from calling the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, to testify before the House of Commons committee studying Beijing's election meddling.
For more than 2.5 hours, Madam Chair, Liberal members have talked about everything from their time in college to their time overseas to all kinds of nonsense unrelated to this very simple motion without a single interruption from members of the opposition. I appreciate that Mr. Turnbull might just be rolling out of bed. Mr. Cooper spoke for 30 seconds, so now that Mr. Turnbull's had his intervention, he can go back to sleep. But we've been here listening to this for 2.5 hours, so let's be judicious on when we want to chime in with those points of order, because we could just call the question, end the cover-up, have the vote, and find out what the Liberals are trying to hide, or we can listen for another 2.5 hours to more filibustering.
The Globe reports that Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly rejected a visa for a Chinese diplomat in the fall of 2022 on grounds of foreign interference. The Globe also reported that China is trying to smooth relations with Canada. Wang Xiaowen, a high-ranking Chinese official, led a delegation to Ottawa this week where he met with senior figures including David Morrison, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, as well as Rob Stewart, Deputy Minister of International Trade. Mr. Wang is a senior Chinese Communist Party official at the Ministry of Commerce and serves as Vice Minister of Commerce as well as the China International Trade Representative. The government declined to identify the officials whom Mr. Wang met with at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and at Innovation, Science and Economic Development, ISED, which is in charge of vetting foreign takeovers.
The Globe reports that Beijing is using a workaround strategy for postgraduate researchers to study cutting-edge technology at Canadian and U.S. universities after Washington began denying visas for some Chinese students on the grounds that they might steal intellectual property with military uses, according to a CSIS report.
Mr. Trudeau announces former Governor General David Johnston will take on the role of Special Rapporteur to review the findings of two closed-door panels that Ottawa set up to investigate Beijing's interference activities in the 2019 and 2021 elections.
The Globe reports that China's Vancouver consulate interfered in the 2022 municipal election, according to CSIS. A January 2022 CSIS report viewed by the Globe and Mail outlined how China's then Consul General, Tong Xiaoling, discussed grooming Chinese-Canadian municipal politicians for higher office to advance Beijing's interests. Mr. Tong sought to elect pro-Beijing politicians to City Council in the October 2022 municipal election, in which incumbent Mayor Kennedy Stewart lost to Ken Sim by a margin of nearly 37,000 votes. Mr. Sim expressed outrage after the disclosure. Quote, "If I was a Caucasian male, we're not having this conversation," end quote.
This is the signal that we send to the community that says, if you finally get a seat at the table, there are institutions that are going to knock you down. I think it's disgusting.
BC Premier David Eby says he was disturbed by secret documents describing Beijing's efforts to interfere in Vancouver's mayoral election and had requested a briefing with CSIS.
Toronto Member of Parliament Han Dong announces he is leaving the Federal Liberal Caucus to sit as an independent shortly after Global News published a report that Mr. Dong privately advised a senior Chinese diplomat in February of 2021 that China should delay the release of Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Mr. Dong has denied the allegations.
The Globe reports that Chinese diplomat Zhao Wei was part of efforts by the Chinese government to target Conservative MP Michael Chong and his family following his work in spearheading a 2021 parliamentary motion that declared Beijing's treatment of the Uyghurs to constitute as genocide.
In a meeting brokered by the Prime Minister, CSIS Director David Vignon tells Conservative MP Michael Chong that he and his family were targeted by the Chinese government after he sponsored a parliamentary motion in 2021 condemning Beijing's conduct in Xinjiang as genocide. Justin Trudeau, his National Security Advisor Jody Thomas, and Mr. Vignon met in the West Block office on Parliament Hill.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says CSIS made the decision to not inform MP Michael Chong in 2021 that he and his family were being targeted, and said he didn't know about the target of Mr. Chong until the Globe reported it on May 1st. The spy agency's explanation, he said, was that it didn't send the report up the chain of authority because it felt this, quote, wasn't a significant enough concern, end quote.
2 days ago, we asked what happened to that information. Was it ever briefed up out of CSIS? It was not. CSIS made the determination that it wasn't something that needed to be raised to a higher level because it wasn't a significant enough concern.
Conservative Michael Chong tells MPs that the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor informed him that the 2021 intelligence report about his family being targeted by China was circulated beyond CSIS.
Mr. Speaker, I've just been informed by the National Security Advisor that the CSIS intelligence assessment of July 20th, 2021 was sent by CSIS to the relevant departments and to the National Security Advisor in the PCO. This contradicts what the Prime Minister said yesterday. He said CSIS made the determination that it wasn't something that needed to be raised to a higher level because it wasn't a significant enough concern.
CSIS made the determination that it wasn't something that needed to be raised to a higher level because it wasn't a significant enough concern.
Will the Prime Minister correct the record that this report and information was sent to the departments and to the Privy Council office?
The federal government expels Chinese diplomat Zhao Wei for interfering in Canadian politics. In a statement, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly said Canada has, quote, decided to declare persona non grata Mr. Zhao Wei, end quote, and that the decision was taken following, quote, careful consideration.
China retaliates by expelling Canada's Shanghai-based diplomat Jennifer Lynn Lalonde in a reciprocal countermeasure in response to Canada's own, quote, unscrupulous, end quote, expulsion of Mr. Zhao. Ms. Lalonde was told to leave the country by May 13th.
CSIS says it is in the process of contacting a list of parliamentarians for briefings on Chinese political interference. The spy agency already reached out to 2 opposition MPs, former Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole, who was a candidate for Prime Minister in the 2021 election, and Jenny Kwan, an NDP MP, who has been an outspoken critic of China.
David Johnston releases his first report after being asked by Mr. Trudeau in March to lead an investigation into Chinese interference, ruling out a public inquiry. In his 55-page report, Mr. Johnston says that such interference is an increasing threat to our democratic system, and China is particularly active. He concludes, however, that because intelligence about Beijing's activities is highly classified, it could never be openly discussed with Canadians in a public inquiry. The Prime Minister also says he will not call an independent public inquiry after Mr. Johnston's recommendation.
A majority of MPs in the House of Commons vote for the removal of Mr. Johnston as Special Rapporteur and for Ottawa to set up an independent public inquiry instead. The non-binding NDP motion passes by a vote of 174 to 150, with all 4 opposition parties voting for the measures and only the Liberals opposed.
Given your ties to the foundation's involvement with Beijing, and Beijing's role in your report, do you see a conflict of interest?
Madam Chair, my connection with the association of the Trudeau Foundation had no role whatsoever with the decision-making of the Board of Directors, the acceptance of gifts and so on.
Thank you, sir. You've been friends with Frank Iacobucci for decades, is that correct?
Madam Chair, Professor Iacobucci and I were young law professors at the University of Toronto, I think when I was about 25, and yes, he's been a lifelong friend.
And Mr. Iacobucci, also a member of the Trudeau Foundation, is who you sought out an opinion from on the matter of whether or not you were in a conflict of interest, for which he provided you the exemption or excuse that you were looking for.
Madam Chair, Professor Iacobucci, Justice Iacobucci, was not a member of the Trudeau Foundation. He was a mentor to 1 or 2 students who were scholars of the Foundation. The function of the Foundation is not only to provide scholarships, but to provide the possibility of mentorship for those students by people who are respected in their area.
Well, thank you,
and
sir.
he served in that capacity, and yes, when allegations were made about me having a conflict of interest,
thank you, sir.
He knows me for a long time, and he indicated I had none.
Sir, I believe there's at least 12 retired Supreme Court justices who aren't associated with the Trudeau Foundation, like Mr. Iacobucci. Mr. Iacobucci's law firm, Torys LLP, was also hired. You hired them to assist you, and working for Torys was longtime Liberal donor Sheila Block. So we have you with an association to the Trudeau Foundation. We have Mr. Iacobucci, who is associated with the Trudeau Foundation. We have Ms. Block, who is a lifetime donor and supporter of the Liberal Party, including attending fundraising events with the Prime Minister in recent time. Given all of that, you don't see a conflict of interest?
A majority of Canadians would like the Liberal government to call a public inquiry into Chinese foreign interference, according to a poll. A Nanos research survey commissioned by the Globe and Mail and CTV News also finds 72% of Canadians polled say they would support a foreign agent registry that requires people to disclose their work on behalf of a foreign state.
Mr. Johnston fires the crisis communications firm Navigator after learning it also advised former Liberal MP Han Dong, whose conduct he scrutinized as part of his inquiry into Chinese foreign interference. Mr. Johnston's office said it decided to end its relationship with Navigator after the Globe and Mail reached out to inquire about whether the firm had worked earlier this year with the Toronto MP.
Mr. Johnston resigns as the government's beleaguered special rapporteur on Chinese state interference, citing the, quote, highly partisan atmosphere, end quote, and urging Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to appoint a respected Canadian with national security experience to carry on the role. The leaders of the Conservatives, Bloc Québécois, and New Democrats, however, call on the Prime Minister to set up a public inquiry and to work with all parties to counter foreign interference.
After the resignation of David Johnston, the Liberals try to rewrite history in stating that a public inquiry was always on the table, and that they welcome the suggestions from all opposition leaders to determine the candidates to lead an inquiry and the terms of reference by which the inquiry should operate. Opposition leaders commit to cooperating and submitting candidates as well as terms of reference, but remain skeptical that a full public inquiry has not yet been called.
With each question period session, opposition leaders continue to call for a public inquiry to be called while they collaborate behind the scenes to satisfy the criteria request from the government.
Talks appear to have stalled. Speaking with people who've been involved in the situation, there were meetings up until last Friday, and then communication from the minister put in charge to fix this, Dominic LeBlanc, just stopped. No calls, no meetings, no emails returned, and now Trudeau is out in public saying it's all the fault of the Conservatives. That's right, Justin Trudeau is trying to blame the opposition party for him not calling a public inquiry.
Why hasn't been an agreement between the parties in the negotiations to set up a public inquiry? And I would appreciate fresh English as well.
We're waiting. We've offered the Prime Minister all the information he's asked for. We've suggested a mandate, a time frame. We have names ready to share with him as soon as he confirms that he's going to go ahead with it. But the ball has been in Mr. Trudeau's court now for, well, about 10 months. And Canadians are waiting. You know, it was, November of 2022 when the story broke that Beijing had interfered in multiple federal elections to help Mr. Trudeau win, that they continue to open police stations in Canada. Since that time, we've been calling for a public inquiry. We've told the Prime Minister we're prepared to cooperate with him any way we can to facilitate that inquiry. And we've given him all the information he's asked for. We're sitting next to our phone, waiting for him to call with any news on when that inquiry will happen. We continue to call upon Justin Trudeau to stop the delays, call a public inquiry. Let's bring home control of our democracy.
Over the last number of months, I have held regular discussions with opposition House leaders regarding the creation of a public process which would examine matters related to foreign interference in Canada's elections and democratic institutions. This negotiation, an extent to which we have involved opposition parties throughout the process, is unprecedented. I can share with you the details of these discussions. The Government of Canada, with the support of all recognized parties in the House of Commons, will appoint the Honourable Marie-Josée Hogg, a judge of the Court of Appeal of Quebec, to lead a public inquiry established under the Inquiries Act. Justice Hogg will be tasked with examining and assessing interference by China, Russia, and other foreign states and non-state actors, including any potential impacts, to confirm the integrity of and impacts on the 2019 and 2021 general elections at the national and the electoral district levels.
What we have given you are the facts and only the facts. We have intentionally not provided our opinion because Canadians deserve to know the bare facts and nothing else. This has been your Northern Perspective.